Welcome to the Advocacy Reports and Dashboard tutorial for 2AC3. Again, we have a number of these reports, including an administrative report, a education report, and a networking/events report. This one is somewhat unique and has different aspects than especially the other kind of core service areas reports. And so I want to go over all of that and kind of show you what that looks like. But ultimately, just like all the other reports, it ends up creating a dashboard that can be shared in a very user-friendly kind of way, and is a great way to keep everybody up to speed on what can be a complex area to keep track of. And we've come up with some unique items here to help with tracking. So to start out with, again, just an overview here of the report itself and the tabs. We're going to start with the advocacy elements, and this is really going to track more of the event-oriented presentations and offerings, those types of things. Again, this may not be as robust as some of your other areas like education and networking in terms of these larger event items that have member interactions and even in some cases some non-member interactions, but will allow you to track the amount of interactions that you're having with folks overall. So again, if you haven't seen the other reports that the kind of overviews that I've provided, I want you to focus in on, there are a couple of different areas. There's going to be this top area here listed by month, and then the numbers that coincide with each of those months are going to generate a report. Now keep in mind, these don't have asterisks beside them. So essentially where you're going to be entering in any data, there will be an asterisk. And so we want to move down to the bottom portion of this into this area, which is where all the data entry is actually going to take place. So of course we start with the month here. So it's a drop-down menu. I'll show you more in a moment as to where those come from. The number of member interactions here, non-member interactions, and total interactions. If you've looked at the other department reporting that I've showed you, and in particular the education reporting, this is going to look very familiar. Again, no asterisk here, so the total interactions are generated by these previous two columns. The advocacy offerings, this has a number of different things that we have dropped down. Again, I've got a list that's been generated that you can customize and change to fit whatever your advocacy offerings might look like. Total offerings, again, no asterisk here, so this number is going to be automatically generated. A number of full cost versus number of low cost events, those are also going to be automatically generated. So as we go over into here, event cost type, this is where we're going to start to, and this is an important one, again, asterisk, you want to make sure, but this one's a trigger for a lot of different information being filled in. So you want to make sure that you're doing one of these items, whether it's other, free, low cost, full cost. You want to make sure that you're selecting that based on what the actual model was that you used to fund that. So hours, this is also a number that needs to be generated, and again will help to populate a number of other columns. So you want to make sure to do that. If there were any sort of rating system, you can certainly use this. It's in there. Again, there are going to be items in here that you may or may not use. It's meant to be a fairly all-encompassing template for you to enter data which matters most to you. Again, income and expenses over here are entered, which will generate an income and loss opportunity. So that's kind of the quick overview of that. And then ultimately you can see the two October items down here, and then those are calculated to create your overall October items up here. Total interactions, the total offerings, all that data gets entered up into those top areas automatically. You don't have to do anything about it. It also, by the way, if we come in here to the annual, this is skipping tabs a little bit and moving forward, but the annual and year-over-year numbers, these will also all be automatically updated for the current year. Now, I didn't enter in any information from previous years, but as you utilize these year over year, you'll have data to put in, and you'll start to be able to demonstrate kind of year over year comparables, which is great for trends and really helping you to kind of come up with ideas in terms of how you're performing or not performing. So that's not going to be generated here, but these will automatically generate on this page. Again, no asterisk means that those aren't anything that you have to enter data for. So I'm going to skip over this guy for just a moment and come to this volunteer and staff. This is interactions that are tracked in terms of the volunteer work that goes into create the behind the scenes for your advocacy efforts. Essentially, you come down here, you enter the month, the number of interactions, and again, interactions aren't anything other than those things which we do where we have face-to-face interactions with members, but we want to track those. The activities, again, this is a customizable list. I'll show you where that is generated, and you can put in whatever you would need here. Again, all these drop-down lists are customizable for your needs, but you can select any one of these: staff time and then the number of hours. And again, in advocacy, we're probably going to be more heavy on the hours than we are on the actual interaction. So I think it's really great to be able to tell your story that folks can understand how much work goes into the work that you do in advocacy, whether it be through your volunteer hours or your staff hours. And then ultimately, this is going to generate a table over here, which will need to be updated on a monthly basis. So if you go down here and hit refresh, it will update those. In this case, it closes it down because we don't have any activities in there. That then generates a department chart down here of activities, which again, at this point, because there's nothing showing, you won't see anything in here. But when you add those numbers in, they will generate. Quickly, I want to go back to this again. Speaking of those pivot tables, there is a pivot table at the bottom of this that will need to also be updated on a monthly basis. So once you finish entering your information for the month, just come down here, simply right-click, hit refresh, and that's going to update these numbers over here, as well as this chart, which we're going to use that chart later on in our annual dashboard reporting and tracking. So with these guys in mind, let's pop back to this. This is the section that's different than the other department reports, and this is really going to get into and is meant to align around the NAR requirements of ACT Invest, but we've added a couple of others in terms of voting and informing and volunteers. And so this data up here, again, unless otherwise noted, like this guy right here, NAR resources used or state resources used, if that's something that's important for you to track, you'll need to enter those in individually. Those aren't tracked below, but everything else is going to be self-populated based on, again, the information that is entered down below in this chart that I'll walk you through here in just a minute. So we've got our ACT, the number of positions taken, our advocacy success rating. I'm going to talk more about that coming up later in terms of what that is and how we define that. I'll show you that in just a moment. Those resources used, as I noted a moment ago, those have to be entered individually under the month that they're being utilized in. Then we've got a call to action response total. We've got a call to action response percentage, again, helpful in terms of your reporting back to NAR. This invest piece starts to track whether you do apply for grants or give grants, the number of grants that you've received, the grant funds that you have received total, RPAC, your fundraising here, your raised funds versus your invested funds. And if you do any sort of community fundraising, you'll be able to track that here, as well as the investment piece of those community funds. And then an overall all funds raised, so you can start to tell your story of how many funds that you've raised as a community, as well as then how many of those dollars we ended up utilizing. From an inform piece, I always like to make sure that our informing, our sharing of market reports, data, any interactions with the media is tracked. And so I encourage you to find ways to track your housing report impressions. One way to do that is if you have a PDF which you generate from your housing reports, is to use a tracking an online posting source called Issue, ISSUU, and it'll show you the number of impressions monthly so that you can share that in terms of the kind of impact that your market or housing reports are generating. Again, this is all going to be self-generating. This is going to show you the number of impressions monthly, the media impressions that you get, and then any other informational impressions. If you want to track like your visit to any service clubs or anything like that, the number of impressions that those create, you can certainly do that here. And then finally, volunteering, your community hours of involvement total here, the community involvement hours on a monthly basis, again, automatically generated, and the total number of community involvement actions. So the number of hours and actions will be tracked. So all of this gets self-generated up here and is ultimately going to lead to those dashboard reports that I keep talking about, which I'll show you here in just a moment. In terms of entering the data, we're going to come down here. Again, anything with an asterisk requires that you enter that information. So the issue, action, description, these shouldn't be too in-depth, but just something so that you know what it is. In this case, city housing affordability policy. Now in the general topics, again, this is customizable based on this list over here that I'll show you in a moment. You could change whatever that fits with your topics, but here we have affordability, regulatory, development, fees, costs, costs, land use, comp plans, infrastructure, others. So those are if they're issues related. Then we have some other things in here that are going to be critical to fill out. So your call to action, your RPAC funds, your fundraising, your community involvement, grants, community investment, all of these elections. All of these items will then automatically lead to certain portions of this being populated and ultimately the population of your chart. So you want to make sure that you fill in this general topic and that we've got them in alignment with what is reflective for you. Same thing as you've seen on the other reports here. Month, you can drop that down. Again, if you're in a calendar year, we can change the order of this for you so that it's in alignment with your year. You want to make sure and enter in your hours. Was there a position taken? This is going to be important. Remember how I said above, we're going to create a actual advocacy success rating, and that's on a basis of 1 to 5. And so I'll show you the specifics of that here in a moment. But if you have a position taken, this is where we start. So you want to make sure and enter that. This is going to automatically populate if there was a position taken once you say yes here. Now here's where we get to this position status outcome. So this item is important in terms of tracking, but also especially if you're going to do, if you've taken a position, you'll want to make sure to select the right one. So position was outcome with amendments, or position was the outcome. This one's actually the 5. The position was outcome with amendments is 4. Position was part of outcome is 3. Position was not part of outcome is a 2 rating. And then finally, passed, but a position was opposite of outcome leads to a 1. And then should it have failed, but that was your position, then that will give you a 5 score. And then the position was opposite of outcome, that will give you a 1 score. So based on what you select here as the outcome, that's going to automatically generate this advocacy success rating, and so you want to make sure to get that right. And again, I can walk you through how that was created, and we can change language to suit you if you want to come up with something better. There was a grant used here, so we select that. Funds received, the funds that were invested, and then here we had an action, so we put in the action total and the percentage of action. No impressions here to speak of. I'll show you one where, again, if you're doing monthly housing reports, you can put that in, the basic information, which month it was, and then we'll come over here and we'll track those impressions. Again, if you use issue, you can get some impressions tracking. There are some other PDF formats out there that allow you to do some tracking, but this will actually allow you to start to look at, the impressions that you're getting from your housing reports. And then finally, RPAC fundraising here, as well as candidate support. So you choose these items, and then you come over here and you can look at the amount of funds received, funds invested, all those. Should be fairly straightforward. So once you've entered this data down here, then it's again going to automatically generate and populate the information up here for you to view. Most importantly, though, what it's going to do is it's going to start to generate dashboards for us to be able to share with leadership in a very digestible form, and then ultimately our general membership. So again, we look at our overall interactions for the department. That's through our events and those types of things. You can track non-member interactions versus member interactions if you do that. If not, don't worry about it. Just track your interactions overall. This then down below, overall department interactions, calculates in our volunteer interactions in addition to any event-oriented advocacy interactions, so you can see all that information generated here. In this case, we're only showing the last month and the year-to-date total. Depending on what you want, you can come over here, select this guy, and you can select over here and show more of the months if you want. Simply do that, click apply, and it's going to add those guys in. So you can show the whole year if you want. You can show 1 quarter at a time, or you can just show 1 month at a time, depending on what it is that you're wanting to offer. Once again, the number of offerings down here, this shows free and low cost versus full cost and the total number of offerings. This isn't, again, going to be a bigger portion of your advocacy, I'm guessing, but it's there and available. Remember we said you want to go in and update the pivot table down at the bottom each month. This chart is going to be generated from that. So it's going to show you the number of offerings and the percentage of your offerings in each of the key areas or offerings that you have within your advocacy department. Free versus low costs, or excuse me, year-to-date free low cost versus full cost. So what percentage are free versus some cost or a full cost year over year. So this would give you the comparisons. If you had 17 numbers, you could start to look at your comparables year over year on where you're at with the number of offerings. Now we start to get into the data of the ACT, Invest, Inform, and Volunteer piece. This is our format here that starts to show the number of positions taken throughout the year. And then we move into our advocacy success rating, which again, we've got the explanation here of which was what. It shows you the for each of the positions that you've taken, and then it's also going to show you overall, which is going to be an average, so you can see how you're performing at the overall in the year. Call to action response rates, that'll show you for each month that you had a call to action response totals for those same months. Your advocacy funds raised will start to generate reports for all of your funds versus your RPAC versus your grant totals. And again, maybe you don't have all these, that's fine. We can come over here and we can actually deselect. If we don't want to see grant funds raised, we can simply just apply that. It'll take those guys out. So you can select what you want in here. And again, you can select the whole year, whether you want the overall numbers or not. You can choose what shows up in this report simply by clicking on that little guy right there and updating. Then you look here at all of your advocacy funds invested. Shows you a chart of that. And then your grant total received versus your grant funds received. And then we wrap up with some RPAC information in terms of when you raise those dollars. This is really great when you start to see year over year comparables. You can see which months are generating the most fundraising for you. And obviously you're going to know your cycle and typically have some larger scale events and fundraising activities at certain times of the year, but you'll be able to do year over year comparisons. Then your community dollars raised and invested. If you do that, and again, if not, you can take any of these reports out simply by just clicking on them, deleting them in your dashboard. And then the community involvement hours, as well as the total number of community involvement actions. And finally, your your housing market impressions, as we've talked about, will display in any other media coverage or other impressions that you want to show. So that is the general aspects of it. A couple times I've alluded to these lists. Let me show you that before we conclude. Each of these lists has different things, the advocacy title. You can come in here, anything you change in here will automatically update in the drop-down menu. So you can customize this to be whatever you want, your staff name, you can put whatever you want in here, and it'll automatically drop it down in that drop-down list on those items. And finally, one other tab, if you want to just keep some general updates as a part of your reports, you can select the month, you can select who's reporting it, the general topic, and then a description. So it's a nice little way to just track some non-quantitative items if you want to in the report as well. So as you can see, it's fairly in-depth. If you have questions on this, please feel free to get a hold of me. I'm happy to go over this and help you to customize or better understand it. You can go to twayc3.com/reports. We'll get more contact information, more information there on all of the reports that I have available, including an administrative report, education, networking reports, in addition to this advocacy report that you can use to help keep your board of directors up to speed. And should you wish to participate in any upcoming trainings, I'll be doing some more long-form question and answer online trainings. Certainly shoot me an email. It's twayc3@gmail.com. That's the number 2wayc3@gmail.com. Thanks so much for hanging out and checking it out. If you have any more interest, be sure to get a hold of me. Appreciate it.